So like we said before, HasLab Unicron has been backed, it's funded, everything's great. But here's a better question. Just how many really are going to be made now that it's been backed? And the reason why this question comes up is because originally we were like, okay, it's got to hit 8,000. And if 8,000 gets hit, it'll get backed. And then we'll know that we own something that's one of potentially 8,000 and then some change. When it got backed, and now, like, post Sunday, post New York Comic Con, when you go to the HasLab website right now and you go to the page where you would have backed Unicron, it just says, yay, it got backed, and they got 8,000 plus backers. And you don't really know what that number is. So you don't really know how many of this unit or of this product exists in the world. But there is a way to do that. Now, through the coding of the website itself, and I'm going to use this in the HTML terms and using Google as a way to break down the developer kind of HTML coding of it. Essentially, if you could do this yourself too, and you'll be able to see it. Essentially, that if you go on, if you have Google Chrome, to give an example, and you go to your settings and you go to developer tools while looking at the HasLab website, if you go to elements, which shows the whole HTML code breakdown of the website, and you scroll through it all, you're going to find a line of code, which is the crowdfunding bar progress. And normally that bar progress would be, between 0 and 1 pretty much of percentage. But it says there that the bar percentage is at 141%. So 141% is quite a bit, because when you think about it, 100% of 8,000 is 8,000. We're going to do some math here. But 141% of 8,000 is 11,280. So let's repeat that. 11,280 Unicrons. That's over 11,000 Unicrons made. That's 3,280 more than were previously expected of the 8,000 needed. And when you really think about that in the grand scheme of things, I mean, that's, again, 3,280 more than originally needed of the 8,000. When Hasbro was struggling to get this off the ground, when they had to do that extension, they were at about, I think they were at like 5,700 or 5,400 at the time. When you think about it, like, that's crazy, because if you take like that 3,280 and you take that away from the 8,000 that was needed, that puts you at like 4,720. So ultimately, in the end, they got way more than even they expected. And if that extra 3,000 was present when they were struggling to get backed originally, they would have been way over on top of that. So this is pretty crazy. But what this tells us more than anything is it really tells us who backed it, pretty much, us who are going to be getting this in the mail, it gives us a really good idea of the numbers that exist out there. Now, obviously, someone like me, I don't really care too much about the value of my product. I've always been someone who, while I own some of the rarest Transformers of all time, I would always like it if they've done reissues or re-release it, so that way everyone is able to enjoy it. I'm not planning to sell them anytime soon, so it's not like I'm looking at it from an investment standpoint. By the time I probably ever do sell my Transformers, I'll be like 90 to 100 years old. I'd sell them more to help my grandkids, if anything. But by then, kids probably won't even care about Transformers, and they'll be more a relic of another time, if anything else. So and I only see this through experience through my father, who is also a toy collector, and how his era of toy collecting, the Dinkies and Corgis of the 50s and the 60s, and those guys of that era, and how the value of those have heavily diminished because more and more of the people who are interested in that product really don't exist anymore. I'm not saying that they all died off, but they're considerably less. And what's going on here is that this pretty much tells people who are investors Not someone like me, maybe not someone like you who are listening, but for people that maybe bought one or two Unicrons hoping to resell the other one, at least this gives you an idea of how many of them are out there. So it looks like there's going to be over 11,000 of them out there. It's not going to be 8,000. So, and when you're talking over 11,000, that's more than any BotCon exclusive. That's more than, well, obviously any lucky draw. A lot of store exclusives, specifically, like to give an example, Walgreens, when they used to do specific store exclusives, sometimes those only number in the 10,000. Store-wide across all the United States, there's only about 10,000 of them out there. And I had this conversation once with Aaron Archer where we were talking about specific really rare Unicron trilogy toys that were store exclusives, and how some of them, like, to give an example, the Red Thrust is a good example, which was Armada Thrust, was done in a Power Links color in red and had an extremely limited release. And there's only about 7,000 of those out there, and so it's, you look at this Unicron, and while it's a big and impressive toy, and, let's separate, just the numbers, and yeah, it's awesome. It's awesome. Don't get me wrong. But from a rarity standpoint, it falls into a latter category of more like, there's a lot of other stuff that are way more rare than this thing. So again, it doesn't bother me. Don't care about it personally, but it is something to make note of, that this number. And keep in mind too, another thing too, is that this number, as I keep going back to it, this piece of coding, that number goes up and down. It actually is shifting back and forth. It goes from 138 to 141 to 145. And I think that's because now they're starting to process the credit cards, and either some people canceled, some people, they canceled their credit cards. They don't want to be a part of this. They didn't think that it was going to get funded, and now they want to not have to spend the money. Some people are getting cold feet. So this number could go up and down. But I mean, as it stands, as of this recording, as of Monday morning, this is something that is at that 11,000 plus mark and makes it not as rare as we think it is. And it's kind of good news, because that means there's a good surplus of them out there. And that means probably there might be some people that are willing to part with it maybe in the future. Maybe some people got 2 or 3, so they'll probably end up on the secondary market. Now, how much that'll be on the secondary market is a whole other discussion. That is something that's totally dictated by the market itself, not so much the individual sellers. I always say that value is really dictated by the people who buy it, not so much by the people who sell it. That's why I always say that scalping is always been a two-way street. You could blame someone for buying up all of a certain product, but it's really only your own fault if you then choose to pay their outlandish prices. Scalping will only not exist if people choose not to pay it. So like if someone buys up, I don't know, all the Generation RCs back when there was the last wave of Generations, the comic book ones, and then, whatever it was, MSRP, I think it was $12.99. And then the guy resells it for like $30, and everyone just agrees to spend that $30. That guy's going to continue doing it. And it's kind of the same thing here. So the Unicron price right now, we don't know what a secondary market value will be, but that'll be totally dictated by the secondary market and whatever they're willing to pay, because of the, as I always say, the FOMO, the fear of missing out. So we'll see what happens. But again, it's good news, at least, because 11,000 plus means there's a lot of them out there. Again, 3,280 more than we thought. So that's really good. Now, granted, there's going to be collectors that are going to get it. They're going to open it. It's going to sit on their display. And those are going to be what I call pretty much standard locked in stock, which is you're never going to see those ones on the secondary market. They're going to be in people's collections and they're going nowhere. But there's always a good 25% of that, whether it be BotCon exclusives, whether it be San Diego Comic-Con exclusives. A good 25% of that stock ends up on the secondary market from people that are, again, trying to scalp, to buy, to resell. And that market hopefully will be able to get it at some kind of an affordable manner. Clearly, it's not going to be at the price that was originally asked. The scalper would not have bought to resold it just to make the break even. So it's something that you really need to consider if you're someone that missed out on this. just be aware that people are going to throw big numbers at you, and don't pay those big numbers if it's something that's going to hurt your wallet, or that if you feel internally you could wait and a better opportunity will come. And the better opportunity will probably come because, like I said, usually 25% of any stock of this limited nature ends up on the secondary market. If originally that 25% was only 8,000, then you're talking, only maybe like 2,000 of those might end up on the secondary market. But it's not 8,000. It's 11,000. So that's a lot more that could end up on the secondary market. So keep that in mind. Definitely, if you're someone that didn't get this, don't worry. There's probably going to be another opportunity. You're not going to be paying what was originally intended, but at the same time, who knows? Who knows? There might be that one guy that bought it at full price, and then he opens it up, he puts it on display, and then he realizes this takes a lot of space, and it doesn't do it for him, and he just wants to sell it at cost or maybe less, and you got to pay the shipping or whatever. But, keep an eye on the forums, keep an eye on Twitter or whatever. Someone's going to probably want to part with this, and maybe you might get lucky. But at least, again, the good news from a secondary market purchase standpoint, there's a lot more out there than we thought. The bad news from the investor standpoint is that there is a lot of those out there, so it's not as rare as you think it is than, say, some of the most simple things like Walgreens exclusive Headmaster Brainstorm or something. A lot less of those in the market than there is, say, of Unicron, as crazy as that sounds. So keep that in mind. Now, that's all I really want to touch on with that. Let me know what you think, and let me know if you got in on this now that everything's said and done, because the last time we talked about it, we were like on the home stretch of a day left. Let me know if you got in on this, how excited you are, and it's still a very decisive and dramatic thing to be discussing, and, people are now going, well, what's the next thing? I don't think Hasbro's going to be doing next thing for a while. At least not anytime soon. So let me know what you think, and let's hope for the best.